So cooking as a survival skill, pretty important topic, and I think it needs to be discussed. Several days ago, we did a video about the foundation of preparedness, which is shelter, food and water, safety, security, transportation, and financial stability. We're going to cover the food and water portion of that in this video today. Now, there are 1,000 videos on YouTube. I've got them out myself on exactly what to store, how to store it, and all of that. I'm going to do you one better. We're going to actually talk about what the hell do we do with all this stuff that we've stored up. You got to eat or you're going to die. You got to eat every single day, so it's probably pretty important. So stay tuned and let's discuss it. By the way, I'm Matt with BAAM Ranch. Good to have you here. Happy to see you, and thanks for watching. Y'all let me know if you want me to continue this little mini-series on the, shelter, food, water, safety, security, transportation, and financial stability. And remember, likes and comments, they kick the big tech right in the balls. It really does help us out with the algorithm. So let's break this down on where do we start on this. So let's be honest, most people can't cook. And it's not just the young people, it's people on up in their 50s. They can't cook, or they think they can, meaning they can dump something out of a box or a frozen bag or something, other pre-mixed thing like that, and they call that cooking. That's not cooking, that's just heating up something that somebody else put together. So I'm going to kind of focus this on mainly stuff that you can grow and make yourself, not some specialty thing that you have to buy from the store. Whenever I get into the protein stuff, you're probably going to have to buy most of your meat of, whatever kind you choose. But let's talk about the stuff we can actually grow and store if we need to with gardening and whatnot. First of all, eggs. Eggs are the superfood. That's all I'm going to say about that. Eggs go with anything, and they can be used with anything as an ingredient to cook just about anything you want. Vegetables, onion, garlic, two main staples. After that, I'm probably going to go with carrot and celery. That's what we use to add flavor and color to other dishes. And then, zucchini, and you'll probably need to buy the rice, but rice is cheap and stores really well anyway, so that shouldn't be too big of a deal. Other things that would be nice to kind of add in there, if you can do some potatoes, some peppers, just some other stuff that you and your family enjoy eating, lettuce and things like that. Now, as far as seasonings, really all you actually need is salt, pepper, garlic. You can cook anything in the world with salt, pepper, garlic, but it might be nice to, have some chili powder, some parsley, oregano, basil, and a little bit of, thyme and some other just generalized spices. Once again, all of that stores pretty well, and a lot of it you can grow in your garden yourself anyway. Before we get started and get too deep into it, I'm going to give you one quick power tip for any type of cooking whatsoever. I want you to take your hand, and cup the palm like it's going to hold a golf ball. Then get a teaspoon of salt. Dump it in that little pocket in the palm of your hand and get used to what that looks like. Do that a couple times and learn that. Dump it out, and then do the same thing with a tablespoon. Just being able to measure that, pouring it into your hand and measuring out a teaspoon or a tablespoon is going to save you a ton of time and a ton of frustration. You're not going to be digging for a measuring spoon and all of that. 3 teaspoons to a tablespoon, easy enough to figure out. Eventually, you'll get to be able to where you can do that with flour. You'll have your normal bowl that you use. You could dump out a cup of flour or a cup of water and get pretty close, at least enough to finish what you're doing. As far as the stuff we actually need, basic utensils, spatulas, spoons, whisk, things like that. And really, you can cook anything in a 10 to 12 inch pot, and the same thing with a 8 to 12 inch skillet. If I'm cooking a lot of meat, I kind of like to have a bigger skillet, but I do sometimes use down to an 8 inch. With all of these things, you could get by with a 10 inch skillet or pot. Pick what you want, I don't care. Cast iron's awesome, stainless steel is awesome. I've got some of the non-stick stuff. It doesn't matter, you can cook with it. learn to cook with what you got. So now let's jump into the actual what do I do stuff. All right, so we need to be able to cook meat, a protein. I'm just going to refer to it as protein. It could be a steak or ground beef, chicken, pork chops, anything, fish. I'm just going to refer to it as protein because for all practical purposes, it's all cooked the same, right? Just to different temperatures and different likings depending on what you want to do. So we need to be able to cook a protein. We need to be able to make bread. We need to be able to make a couple of bases for soups, stews, things of that nature. And then we need to be able to make a couple different sauces. All of that's pretty easy. Let's jump into the meat. So as far as the meat goes, if it's a solid meat, you know, like a steak or a pork chop or a chicken thigh or a chicken breast, given whenever I've got the time to do it, I always want to salt that stuff first. What the salt does is it draws the moisture, at least the water, not the grease, not the juices, but it draws the water out of the meat. You need to do that for minimum about 2 hours. You could do it overnight if you want, because whenever we cook with all that water still in it, we're effectively boiling our meat, which we don't ever want to do that. The juices, you know, the juiciness of the meat is still there. It doesn't mess with that. When we get done with that, I like to scrape it off and then just season with salt, pepper, garlic. Pretty easy. And then we want to sear it. We want to get a burning hot sear. You know, put some oil or some butter in your pan and sear that off. And then however you're going to cook it, whether that's going to be in the oven or on the grill, however you want to cook it, flipping it often as needed. Some people say you only want to flip your meat, you know, once. Cook it right here on this side, then flip it over, and do not flip it another time. Don't listen to those people. If somebody's telling you that, it's a wives' tale myth, and you need to quit listening to them for your advice on cooking anything. Bring it on up to the desired temperature. You know, for chicken, 165, 145 for pork. I generally cook steaks, you know, beef to about 140. No matter what that is, the target temperature you're wanting to reach, if you have access to a meat thermometer, which makes life a whole lot easier if you do, pull that off about 5 degrees before it reaches that. Wrap it in some foil, put a towel over it on a plate, do something to allow that to come up to temperature, because the meat will continue to cook until it reaches, you know, until it cools off. So if you pull it off at 135, it's going to naturally over time raise to 140, and you'll get your full cooking temperature that way. And then let that cool back down where it's still warm, but we want the juices to solidify so that we don't just cut it all, you know, cut it out, you know, I can't talk. So that whenever we cut into it, they don't all run out. You hear this kind of myth that it allows the juices to reabsorb. Once the juices leak out, they're not going back in. But what it does is allows that juice to get a little bit closer to its natural gelatin type consistency, so it doesn't just all spill out from being superheated. Other than that, you know, all meats cook about the same. You can apply that across everything. Ground meat is a little bit different, but it's pretty easy to figure out how to cook, you know, ground meat. Okay, so after that, let's move on to breads. I cook bread from scratch all the time. I make dinner rolls. I make loaf bread for sandwiches, bread sticks. I do pizza dough. You can take and spread it out like what you get at the pizza place for, you know, like cheesy garlic bread. I do all of that off of the same basic recipe, which is really simple. It's, you know, time consuming, but it's pretty simple to do. Basically, you get about 3 cups of flour. You need to make sure you have about 3.5 cups. You'll need a cup to a cup and a quarter of water, a packet of yeast, salt, sugar, and some kind of oil. It could be melted butter, it could be olive oil, it could be vegetable oil if you wanted. Kind of like the natural oils, and stay away from the seed oils if I can. But heat you some water up where it's warm, you know, about 100 degrees. Pour a cup of that into a bowl, drop your yeast in, and put about a tablespoon of sugar. Set that aside while you're doing other things and let the yeast kind of wake up, and it'll get foamy where that yeast starts to come back to life. While you're doing that, measure out 3 cups of flour. If you're cooking bread specifically, I like to use bread flour, although general purpose flour works just fine. There's no reason you can't use it. There's nothing wrong with it. Take a tablespoon of salt, throw it in there. Take about 2 tablespoons of oil, melted butter, whatever you want to do. Throw that in there. And now that your yeast is kind of activated, make you a little, crater, a little volcano hole down in the middle of your flour. Dump that in, and then just get you your hands, a spatula, a spoon, and start kind of folding that together and mixing it up until it kind of starts to come together. It'll be a kind of an ugly looking shaggy, I think shag carpet, kind of a sticky dough. It sticks to your hands, but not too bad. You can still get it off, and you might need to add a little bit of flour depending on the humidity and things like that. It's just something that you'll learn with experience. Do that until the dough starts to come together, and then dump that booger out on the table, floured surface so it doesn't stick, and start kneading it. And whenever you knead it, you fold it over, you fold it back, and then push it. Fold it back, and then push it. And that stretches the dough out and builds the gluten. Do that for 8 to 10 minutes, and eventually it'll stop being sticky, and it'll get to where it's kind of smooth and a little bit tacky, but not sticky. It doesn't stick to your fingers, and you can stretch it out. You stretch it out a little bit where it kind of gets where the light will shine through it. Once you get to that point, you're done kneading your dough. Oil you up a bowl, put a little bit of oil on that dough ball, set it aside, cover it with a towel or plastic wrap, whatever, for 2 hours in a decently warm spot. If it's cold, you're gonna have to let it sit for longer, but a decently warm spot. Put it in your oven, turn the oven light on. That makes the perfect temperature. Leave it there for 2 hours. After the 2 hours, the best part comes. You take it out, uncover it, punch the center of the dough. That lets all the gases out, and then dump it out on the table. Knead it a few more times, and then divide it up into whatever shape you're making. Are you making rolls? Are you making breadsticks? Are you like the Olive Garden style? Are you making loaf bread? Whatever shape you decide to put it in, make it into that shape. Put it in whatever container or lay it out on a baking sheet, however you're going to do it. Cover it back up. Let it sit for another 45 minutes or so until it kind of doubles. It should look sort of puffy. You kind of poke at it and it springs back. This is your second rise. This second rise is important, so don't miss that. Soon, about the last 15 minutes of that rise, preheat your oven to about 375. Throw it in there. If you want a crispy crust, while you're preheating your oven, take a cast iron skillet, stick it in there, and then put just before you put your bread in, dump 1 cup of boiling water in there. The steam will help cook the crust a little faster. Some people say it helps it rise. I don't know. I haven't seen that, but it does give a crispier crust that gives a crunch to it. For a softer crust, don't worry about that. We're going to bake it at 375 for about 30 minutes, 25, 30 minutes until it's done. You kind of tap on it. It sounds hollow. It's golden brown. It looks like done bread. This isn't rocket surgery. You guys can figure this out. After it's done cooking, or just before it's done cooking, you could brush it with butter or whatever, if you want to do something special to it, and pull that out and let it cool down, right? We don't want it to dry out super fast by cutting into it, letting all the steam out. Keep in mind, you can add what you want to this. If you want to put some other seasonings and other flavors, onion powder I like to add sometimes. You can add some cheese to it if you want. Just do whatever you want. Use your imagination. I will say, if it's a loaf bread, you do need to split the top. Put a couple slices in there. That helps it rise a little better. But other than that, hey, it's easy enough. Y'all got it. And the last on the list is, let's talk about our sauce type stuff. You know, your marinara for if you're doing Italian, which could be modified to a pizza sauce, just depending on how much you want to thicken it up. Gravy, and this could be white pepper gravy, it could be brown gravy. It could be, you could modify it a little bit, make a real creamy, cheesy gravy, or even a cheese sauce for macaroni and cheese. It's all pretty versatile. So let's start with like the mirepoix. This is what we're gonna make our base for soups and things of that nature. You can modify this a little bit if you want it spicy or whatever, you know, whatever ethnicity type food you're headed toward. But the basics are this. You take some oil, kind of put a good bit of it in the bottom of the pot or skillet, whatever you're cooking in. Not a lot, but enough to where you can get it in there and kind of cook the vegetables just a little bit. Take some garlic, a couple cloves of garlic, smash them. I actually kind of like the minced garlic that comes in the jar, but I'll take, you know, a butter knife load, dump it in there, and just cook it in that oil until I start to smell it. Then I put some onions, carrots, and celery. You know, chop them up pretty small, however small you like them. This is your game. You make the rules. You do what you want. And cook all of that till it starts to get, you know, soft and translucent, where you can see through it, reach in there, taste one. If it's about the texture and consistency that you like, you're done. Then we're gonna start pouring some broth in there. It could be water if you chose, but a little bit of broth. I like chicken broth. That's what we keep. I make my broth from bouillon. I don't, you know, render my own broth. A lot of people do. If you want to do that, hey, that's awesome. I just use the powdered bouillon. Dump that in there and then let that simmer for about 20 minutes or so, and then you've got a good base that you can take, and you can throw some noodles in there and some cubed up chicken for some stew, chunks of potatoes and chunks of carrots and beef. You've got a wonderful, you know, chicken noodle soup or beef stew, whatever you decide to make with that. And really, as long as you've got these ingredients, you can pretty much take any protein, any leftover. You can do it with sausages. You could replace the carrots with peppers, you know, jalapeno, or just add that to it. And then you've got a Cajun food. It's really, really easy to make, and it makes some absolutely wonderful food. Marinara. Marinara is really easy. Once again, we start with the oil and the garlic. I like to put a little bit of onion in there. Cook that garlic until you can smell it. Cook the onions till they start to get kind of translucent and soft, where you can kind of cut them with a wooden spoon. Then we're going to take crushed tomatoes. We're going to dump that in there, and we're going to bring that to a simmer. If you want it to be a little thicker, then put some tomato paste in with it. Bring all that up to temperature. Season it with your, you know, your basil and parsley. It's already got the garlic in there. Maybe you want to dump some sugar in it to sweeten it up a little bit. Just kind of do that to taste, pepper, that sort of thing. Bring that up to a simmer for, you know, at least 30 minutes. And then if it's a little too thin, cook it on down. You can put some broth in with it if you want to thin it out a little bit. Thicken it up, you can just reduce it. Really easy, and that's, I mean, you're talking easy, 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 and you can make 1,000 different, you know, types of meals out of that. Now let's move to the gravies. Okay, let's just start with like a white gravy. So take a little bit of milk, you know, about a cup of milk, pour it in your skillet or your pot, and then start sprinkling in flour. Sprinkle it in. This will thicken it up and give it that gravy texture. Get you a spatula and flatten all those clumps out. Flatten them out and just keep it moving. Keep stirring it the entire time. Put your pepper in. Add ingredients until it's the amount that you want. A cup of milk and some sprinkles of flour generally makes a pretty good serving for just a few people. You can put a whole gallon in and a whole bunch of flour if you've got a whole bunch of people that you got to mess with. I do like to add a little bit of some kind of oil. Once again, I stay away from the seed oils. Just either butter or olive oil is what I prefer. For brown gravy, we do flour. Put some flour in there with the roux that we've made. And we cook that until it starts to turn a little bit brown. Then we can add broth to that. Once again, I use a bouillon, and it starts to make this beautiful brown gravy. Add in a little bit of, whipped cream, or if you don't, not whipped cream, but heavy whipping cream, whole milk. If you don't have it, the whole milk will work just fine. And you'll get this really, really good, creamy, delicious brown gravy that goes great with, over pork chops and rice or something like that. Now, as for rice, there's a lot of debate on how to cook rice. How do I cook rice? I get an 8-inch pot. I dump the rice in until it gets to about my knuckle. Then I dump water in till it gets to my other knuckle. I put a pat of butter on top of that. I measure out some salt in my hand. I throw it in there. I bring it to a boil, a rolling boil. Then I turn it down to a simmer, put a lid on, 15 minutes. I don't care how bad you want to check that rice. You do not touch it for 15 minutes. I do give it a good stir before I put the lid on, but you don't do nothing for 15 minutes. After 15 minutes is done, it's absorbed all of the water. If you still see water in there, you need to put it back on for just a second. That's seldom that happens. Get you a fork and fluff that up a little bit, and then cover it back up with the lid. Let that sit for about 10-15 minutes. You'll have some really good rice. You can use rice for friggin' anything. Rice is almost like eggs. It's a universal food. You can add some eggs to it, do some fried rice, 1,000 different things. We're not gonna get into that in this video. But anyway, that is a little bit of help on how we would actually do something with this food, right? Most of the stuff that I've given you stores really well. Maybe the zucchini, that doesn't store all that well, but it does sit on the shelf for a while. Onions and garlic, they will last you through a winter if you've cooked them right. The seasonings, most of that stuff you can grow yourself. Although it's cheap, you don't have to. And if you dry that, that'll keep. You do have to figure out a way to store your meats and stuff like that. It's okay to freeze meat. People tell you can't freeze meat, but yeah, you can, and it'll last a while, and you should have, enough backup power to be able to run your refrigerator or your freezer as long as you need to. Butter, that's pretty simple. All this stuff is really simple, and keep in mind, we don't want to wait till the end of the world to live good lives. You're going to be eating more healthy food, and it's going to taste a ton better. You're going to hate going to the restaurant because you can make this stuff so much better at home anyway. All right, well, until next time, you guys be safe.